All right, so the next thing, let's talk about the lease agreement. The lease agreement is the agreement between the lessor and the lessee. It creates the relationship between these two. It is a legal contract. All right? So if you remember back to the chapter on contracts, we talked about several things were required to have a contract. Same thing here. Both parties must have what's called the capacity to contract, meaning they have to be of sufficient mental capacity and of legal age. All right? You cannot sign a lease with a minor. They cannot enter into contracts. We were managing property and one in Shelbyville where there were two twin girls, seniors in high school. Their father got a job in Lebanon and was moving to Lebanon and let the girls stay in Shelbyville to finish their senior year. They were not 18. They could not sign the lease. So we had to get their dad on the hook for their lease. They did not have the ability or the capacity to contract. Got to be for a legal objective. Obviously, renting is a legal objective if it's a legal possession. You can't rent someone else's property. There was a scam going on for a while with HUD homes where unscrupulous people were putting pictures of HUD homes on like Craigslist and meeting tenants out there and say, okay, give me your deposit, I'll give you the key and mail you the lease, and then they would just take that $300 or $400 and split. And that lease isn't valid because that's not a legal objective. Did it happen to you?
I didn't give them money, but yeah, I went and met them.
Yeah, you'll see that happens occasionally now where agents will post on Facebook, hey, it's going around again, because sometimes what they'll do is take houses that are listed, that are vacant, and these scammers will put them on Facebook. And I've had agents call me, go, hey, my listing is actually for lease on Craigslist. So that would not be a legal objective. That lease is not a legal objective. All right, because they did not have ownership. Once again, you got to have that offer and that acceptance. The tenant makes the offer, the landlord accepts it. A lot of times people think the tenant makes the offer and the landlord accepts it. You guys can negotiate it. I don't know how successful you'd be, but it is possible. And then once again, one of the other things that were in a contract was this thing called consideration. In the transfer of real estate, remember, we sold at a arm's length transaction, which meant I does not know the other person. Therefore, love and cherish has no value. That's why we put money in the deed, if you remember that. Now, there's a slight difference here. In consideration, other valuable goods and services can play out. It is possible that you could exchange rent for the tenant who may be repairing your property. All right? Because they're adding value to your property. We had a guy when we were real big into the management. We had 60 or 70 homes. We had a worker, our maintenance guy, actually lived in one of the rentals, and we traded him out pay for his rent because he was actually adding value. So that is possible on the rentals. It doesn't necessarily, since you're not really transferring true ownership since it's a lease, value now has another word. It could be services, all right? There are a lot of, I don't know if it's still true, but I'm pretty sure it is, a lot of police officers that live in apartment complexes, and they end up being the security guard for the apartment complex, and for that they get a discount in the rent. All right? That used to happen a lot. I think it still does. If it doesn't matter. The concept is exactly still what I'm talking about. They were trading a valuable service for rent. Now, in the lease agreement, there are several clauses. We're not going to go over every lease because every lease is different. And it's amazing how, never underestimate the stupidity of humans. Because my lease agreement when I started was about 4 pages. It's now almost 11. Does something stupid, you got to put that in the lease as part of the instructions. Apparently, when I was growing up, parking in the front yard was not a gig. But at 16th and Arlington, it apparently was a very common thing to do. And what happened was we had a tenant with parking in the front yard. The yard was wet and raining. When they moved out, my front yard looked like a washboard. I had to bring somebody in and roll it flat back again. And I had to add a statement in my lease. Parking only on the street or in the driveway. No parking in the front yard. All right? So there are definite clauses that you're going to cover, but there are no specific boilerplate lease. If you get into this business, you will have to have an attorney write you a lease. All right? Now, you could use that same lease on multiple properties, but, and please don't you guys try and do it. First of all, you can't write contracts. You're not an attorney. And you're going to forget something and get burned when you go to court. So some of those articles, for instance, like the possession of the premises. This is the one that conveys possession, and it conveys quiet enjoyment. This is the paragraph in there where you're actually giving the person the possession of the property for some time frame.
Seems like really tricky business. Like, make sure you pull the shower curtain when you take a shower, because then there's water all over the floor, and that's damage. And it seems like parking in the yard, like that's. Why would you do that?
Why would people park in the yard? Hell, I don't know. That's why I had the problem with it.
Well, I mean, do they have no investment in the property? So why?
I'm sorry, Hillbilly said what? You park in your yard?
Kentucky, we park in our front yard. We have like 30.
You're from Kentucky?
Yeah, like 30 cars.
How's your Uncle Dad doing? You know the definition of a rich Kentuckian? He's got 2 cars up on blocks. I'm sorry.
I don't think your Phil and teacher would understand.
Do what? Yeah. No. Probably not. So, Holly, back to what you were saying. I don't think that there's anything in there that would specifically say pull the shower curtain. But you might say something, you know, any activities that could cause damage to my property.
And a lot of times people don't do it out of malice. They don't. Oh, damn it. Some people do.
Yeah, there are people that do it a lot with malice. I had one move out who plugged the bathroom sink and turned the water on and left.
Oh, so maybe it's getting their house foreclosed on. They're bitter
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah, they're bitter that they didn't make the payment, so they forced me to throw them out. And then when they left, they got mad and plugged the sink with a towel and turned the water on. It was about 14, 15 hours before I got there, and it flooded about everything.
I walked in and all of our cabinets in our kitchens were turned around.
Oh, that's original. Turn your cabinets around and bolt them. That's way too much work to get even with you. I'd have just ripped them off the wall.
And it was not a great area. I was like, why would you do this? And they painted all the floors black, so that was fun too.
Yeah.
Wood floors.
Yeah, it's amazing the things that tenants will do. And I heard it over here, somebody said it, because they don't have a vested interest in the property, right? They don't have a vested interest. And 90% of them know that you're not going to chase them for good money after bad, because if they haven't paid their rent, that probably means they don't have any money. So what good is going after them? With that being said, I had one tenant that I enthusiastically disliked. All right? And I told her, I said, if you just surrender the property, I will not chase you for back rent. I just want my property back. So she left. I sued her anyway, just because I didn't like her. And I have the right to. I had the right to. And it gets even better. You ever heard of a body attachment?
Yes.
A body attachment is when a tenant loses possession, then you sue for damages, then you can sue for garnishment of wages. If they don't pay, then you can go and get a body attachment, which means when the police pull them over for anything, it works like a bench warrant, they arrest them. Yeah, and they stay there until it gets paid.
And they're a certain company. I mean, Progress will go after them.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing. This woman, we went through the whole process, and I never collected my, like, it was $1,400 or $1,500 until the day she went to jail, and I got paid within 3 days. Yeah. Her family all of a sudden found a bunch of money to pay me. So I have used the body attachment one time, and it was successful in that particular situation. There's a clause in there, the use of the premises. That's what we just talked about. That tells them what they can do, what they can't do. For residential use only. For commercial use. Don't run a business in here. Those kind of things. There's a clause about the term of the lease. This is where you would explain start date, end date, if it was in a state for years. Or the start date and it repeats, if it was in a state from period to period. There's a clause about security deposits. What's the biggest difference, at least in Indiana, this law exists, between security deposit and earnest money from the standpoint of the broker?
Security deposit could probably go in your regular account.
Exactly, very good. I am allowed to commingle security deposits. Probably not the smartest thing, business-wise, because it still becomes an accounting responsibility, but literally I can take security deposit and put it in my general bank account. Cannot do that with earnest money, remember? That's called commingling. We have to have a special earnest money account on the sale of a property. On the rental, I don't need a security or an earnest money account. It's security deposit.
But you always have to have that much in that account, no matter what, correct?
No. It's an accounting nightmare. It's not a good business practice. But as long as when it comes time to pony up the security deposit, you do it, then that's okay. If that involves you going to the poker room the night before to win it, hey, I guess that's okay. Now, in this chapter is going to be the first chapter where you start to see a big difference between residential and commercial in the leasing, all right? Here's the first one. An improvement. Improvements in the residential world are typically done by the landlord. They want to make sure that the new wiring plug-ins wired right so the house don't burn down. They want to make sure there's all the permits pulled if they need them, that meets code. In the commercial world, improvements are typically done by the tenant. Matter of fact, it's even called tenant improvements, or the slang is TI. An example would be that wall right behind you. That wall, when I moved in here, was not here. I put that wall in. I rented just one big room, and I built it the way I wanted to look. I got a dividing wall back there that separates my storage room from my office. I've got that wall that separates the classroom from that whole area. All right? And that comes from, in the commercial world, everybody has their own special setup. Subway wants it to look a special way. That's different than Walden Books wants theirs to look like. So the landlord says, okay, you do it. Of course, they got to follow all the laws and rules about permits and wiring and all that kind of stuff. But in the commercial world, it's literally called TI, tenant improvement. Accessibility. Got to have accessibility for the fair housing. If I have a house and a guy in a wheelchair, have we talked about this? Comes to me, can I tell him no? Oh, apparently we've not talked about it.
He has the right to ramp.
I would assume so, but there were so many people that said no, I couldn't do that, I was afraid. Yes, I can say, I'm sorry, I cannot accommodate you because I don't have the financial wherewithal to lower the doorknobs, put the grab bars on, do that. If he does that, then that takes away that deniability by my factor. And he has to return it back to the original condition. Now, I know I'm trying to read here because someone told me they thought I was wrong and they were wrong because I'm never wrong. You know, people that think they know everything are really annoying to those of us who actually do. You can charge more deposit because the cost to restore it is more. All right? Somebody said, I don't think you can do that. I'm like, you can.
I also I saw a neighbor, they park in their yard, so it's another example.
They live in Kentucky?
No, it's because they're disabled or whatever, they have to pull into the yard to get to the porch.
Okay. Is the yard a yard or do they have a blacktop?
It's a yard, but it just is an example of what.
Nah. I might have a problem with that. I don't know. Truly, I'd ask them to lay some rock down or something so you're not tearing up. Because it was very expensive. I mean, it got ruts in the front yard where they kept parking in it and parking in it. And it was almost $1,000 by the time I got done making my yard level again.
So, is that what you mean by security deposit? No. Like charging more.
Yeah, I mean, if I said I can't rent to you because I don't have a ramp to the front door, I have that right to do that under the economic hardship. Okay. He says, I'll build the ramp. Okay, I cannot deny you. But your deposit's $900 because as well as the $500 that I had as earmarked for the house, I now have to restore my property back to its original position, which means I have to take down the ramp. There's an added cost to that, so I can charge you added deposit.
Okay, so it's not the tenant's responsibility to restore?
No, it is the tenant's responsibility. And theoretically, if they do what they're supposed to do, they get their security deposit back. The reason you charge more is if the tenant blows you off and leaves and pulls a midnight move and you need to restore it back to the house with no ramp, that's an extra cost above the property damage. So, yes, I can charge them more, but theoretically, if they were, and I'm going to use finger quotes, a good tenant, when they moved out, they would have taken the ramp down. And I go back in and go, okay, you restored it, everything's fine, here's your deposit back. So it doesn't matter how much they gave me. You only use the deposit if they,
Skip town.
yeah.
Okay, so the tenant converts the property. Tenant has more security deposit. Tenant restores the property.
They get all the security deposit back.
Okay.
Yeah, that's true with any tenant. I mean, if any tenant comes in, you give security deposit, they move out, you go in and say, oh, they've cleaned the place, they've washed the walls, they've done the carpet, they took all the trash out, they get all their money back, they get the security back. The security deposit theoretically is only there in case the landlord gets harmed financially for some reason. All right? Lack of rent is a harm. So if someone moves out without paying the rent, I can attach the security deposit as part of that. All right? There is a thing called the 45-day letter to get into. A letter to the tenant telling them where all their security deposit went. If you fail, listen to what I'm telling you. If you fail to send this letter, you lose. and the judge will find against you and order you to pay all of it